I'd like to call to order the regular afternoon council meeting for November 7th, 2023. This meeting is being recorded live and is streaming on the District of Summerland YouTube channel. All representations to council, written or verbal, will form part of the public record and be available to the public for viewing electronically or as a written record. Corporate officer, any late items? No late items. If we can approval of the agenda, please. Councillor Patton, Councillor Betts. All in favor? None opposed. That carries. Consent agenda. I would like to remove 4 items of correspondence from the consent agenda. Item A, the Rural Health Network. Item B, the OBWB invasive mussels letter. C. Item D, the letter from Lutheran Church regarding the dog park. And item H, the Silga Community Excellence Awards. Anybody else have anything to remove? Okay, good. So those will all go down into item number 9 down at the end. If there's no other items, could we get a motion to approve the consent agenda as amended? Councillor Peak, Councillor Betts, all in favor? That carries. No delegations today. And so first public comment opportunity on any agenda item. Mr. Bessler.
Hi, Council. Brad Besler, 18816 Garnet Valley Road. I'd like to speak to agenda item 7.3, the 2024 council meeting schedule. I would recommend that we go back to the council meeting schedule every 2 weeks. I've attended the majority of council meetings in the last year, and a lot of these go long. There's been numerous ones that have extended past 3 hours. I know I'm not the only one who's yawning and losing focus on those long council meetings. And I think the people of Summerland deserve councillors who are focused and engaged instead of maybe just agreeing so the council meeting can progress. So I look forward to the discussion today. In my opinion, if you want what's best for Summerland, you'll put it back to the 2 weeks. If you want what's best for you personally, you'll keep it 3 weeks. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Don't see any. Move on to business items. Domestic second services and Director of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We're just going to wait for the slideshow to pop up. Perfect. So the report before council hopes to bring a final resolution to the domestic second service discussion that has been ongoing for quite some time. The recommendations being proposed try to strike a balance between overall fairness as well as incorporating the district's current billing philosophy for domestic water usage. As the slide notes, should council move forward with the recommendations, it would bring an end to the domestic second services and it would start the seasonal water services era. On June 26th, council directed staff to bring back rate review options, as well as to look into the administration of a mock billing period. The report before you covers these 2 directives. In addition, council also resolved to provide each domestic second service connection with a free meter. This is a key decision as during this round of DSS discussions, council and staff have heard from many DSS property owners that they had no issues with paying for the water they're using. Their issue was they do not feel that they should have to pay for the water meter. With council's decision to provide the meters for free, there is no longer a difference between these 224 DSS properties and the 3,720 under 2 acre properties that only have 1 water connection. The district's current billing practice for DSS customers is to invoice an annual flat charge based on a property's arable acres. This is a common billing practice when meters are not utilized, as there is no way to determine actual usage. Unfortunately, a consequence of this billing practice is that it generates the perception of unfairness with those 3,720 under 2 acre property owners that are fully metered. As the table shows, in 2023, the district invoiced DSS customers a total of $80,687. This equates to 1.1% of the water fund's total budgeted revenues for the year. The options being proposed incorporate the district's practice of utilizing a property's lot size to determine monthly water allocations. The rationale in utilizing this practice for the new DSS rate structure is twofold. One, it ensures that all properties being billed domestic water are following the same model, which speaks to fairness and equity. And two, the district's financial billing software is already configured to calculate bills in this manner, and we will not be required to implement any costly modifications. Should council choose to utilize this approach, staff are recommending that those customers who choose to keep their DSS connections, the monthly water allotment calculated on lot size be moved from the property's house account to the new DSS account, and that the house account be allocated a flat 25 cubic meters per month. Now to the options. So option one, this approach is to transition all DSS billing to domestic billing. This option would treat every DSS customer the same as every other domestic water user in Summerland. Monthly base and environmental fees would be invoiced in conjunction with actual water usage. The slide shows estimated costs for each classification, with overall revenues being estimated at $172,004 for the district. Option two is the same as option one, except that monthly charges would only be billed for the 6 months that the service is actually in use. Now, this is a deviation from the district's current billing practice. However, it does concentrate the billing on the actual use of the service. Staff feel this option strikes the best balance between fairness and equity and is the option being recommended. It's important to note that this type of billing approach is already utilized in the district with properties as secondary dwellings on site. So i.e., if a property that has a carriage house, it's billed 2 base fees and 2 environmental levies, as well as consumption, regardless if there's only 1 or 2 meters. Additionally, it's also utilized in buildings that have multiple dwelling units. So each dwelling unit is charged the base fee and the environmental fee. Again, even if there's only 1 meter. This policy is also consistent with the district's electrical billing in that each service at a property is billed a separate base fee. So as the table shows, it's estimated that overall revenues to the district would increase approximately $18,000 when compared to current billing. Additionally, the largest properties could potentially be paying less under this proposed model than the current one. Now, this is important to note based on some of the feedback we have received from the larger property owners who have larger gardens and fruit trees on their properties. Oops. Oh. As noted at the onset of this presentation, one of the directives provided to staff was to explore a 1-year mock billing period. Staff are happy to report back that mock billing can be accomplished, but it cannot be done piecemeal. Our financial billing system does not allow partial amounts to be mocked. So therefore, should council choose to provide DSS customers with a 1-year mock billing cycle for the irrigation season, staff would recommend that the entire invoice be mocked. And now, in addition to that, staff also recommend that for the mock billing period, should council move that way, that DSS customers be invoiced the flat fee for that irrigation season, so the current DSS fee. Staff are also recommending that if a property owner chooses to keep their DSS connection and then decides in the future they no longer want it, that a disconnection fee of $50 be incorporated into the district's water utilities bylaw. So the table in front of council compares the 2 options being presented to the current billing practice. When we compare the recommended option 2 to current, we can see that the largest increase would be seen by those properties under half an acre. When comparing these smaller parcels to other smaller parcels in the district that do not have DSS connections, the question arises on whether a secondary connections on these small parcels is even needed? And now that's a question that each property owner will have to ask themselves prior to making any decisions. However, should these under half-acre properties decide to keep their connections, staff is recommending that the 2024 flat rate for only classification of acres under 0.5 and less, so just the first top line there, that fee be increased by either 50% or 100%. This would equate to an increase of $67.82 at 50%, or $135.63 at 100. Now, the rationale in this approach is basically stagger the potential $249 increase from transitioning from the flat rate model to the proposed model in option 2, doing that over a 2-year period instead of 1. In conclusion, so staff feel the recommendations being proposed strike a balance between overall fairness, as well as incorporating the district's current billing philosophy for domestic water usage. That concludes my summary, and I will take any questions.
Okay, thank you. Council questions, Councillor Van Elfen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through to our Director of Finance. So my farm, for say, with my agricultural meter, I can go online at any time and see what my consumption is. On this one here, after the first year of mock billing, they'll be charged, or even during mock billing, will they know from month to month what their consumption rate is and what they have before they go into a penalty type situation?
So through the mayor to Councillor Van Elfen, yes, moving to the proposed option, each property that decided to keep the DSS connection would be metered, and as such, they would receive a monthly invoice, no different than anyone now that has a house account. And on that bill would be the consumption for the month, as well as the flat fees. So a person would know on a monthly basis what their actual consumption is on that account.
Thank you. Any further questions, Councillor Betts?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through to our Director of Finance, a question about what seems like a double allotment of water to these DSS properties, or the seasonal water service properties. So my understanding is that the house account will get the 25 cubic meters of water, and then each of these properties will actually receive an additional allotment of water based on the size of their property. And is that talking about cubic meters based on that 800 milliliter depth measurement per times arable acres thing?
So through the mayor, yes, bang on. The house would be provided with 25 cubic meters. It's kind of the practice that we follow now when we are looking at carriage homes and any of those other types of properties that don't have secondary meters. And what would happen is, by moving the allotment across onto the DSS service, that would in essence provide them with an additional allotment. So those properties that kept their DSS connections would in fact be receiving 25 times 12 more allotment than anyone else. It's that they would have that 25 additional cubic meters on their home that none of the other 3,720 residents would.
Thank you. Well, I think that would help alleviate some of the problems that we've been encountering with some of the properties with large amounts of agricultural purposes on these smaller lots. Obviously, they're not farm status tax assessment lots. So I think that addressing the question of the volume of water is really important for our residents. That was one of the questions that was uncertain, was would they each be limited to what they received to match just a 25 cubic meter household allotment. So will each resident find out what their allotment will be annually? or monthly, I suppose.
So through the mayor, we could provide that allotment to each of the properties. It would require some administrative work on our end, because no property is the same size. So we could do that. I do have an example. One of my staff members provided this to me on my way up today. Because there is a lot of concern from property owners that, they don't know how much water they're going to be allotted. So this property is 0.4 of an acre. So under the 0.5 acres. And based on the allotment calculations, this property's base water usage for the year is 1,206.5 cubic meters, which is a lot of water. When we're talking, the average monthly is 25 cubic meters. So we could provide that information. It would take some work on our end, but it's probably not something that can't be done. Well, it isn't something that can't be done.
We'll come back. Yeah, is it follow up on something? Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. Sorry, I've been digging into all of this math and these numbers. Somehow this DSS has become my passion project. But because I think it's a valuable discussion. And so in that circumstance, do you think that is it worth the effort to provide these numbers before the first season, or wait until the end of the mock billing period to be able to give people a fair comparison of here's your water usage compared to what your consumption allotment is? I feel like they should know at the beginning or at the end where they are compared to the expectation.
So through the mayor, I think from staff's perspective, what we've historically seen when we do mock billings is that there's not a lot of people don't really look at them all that often because, of course, they're not paying for anything. It's something that we do to provide them with the information that they can make decisions. So from that perspective, doing it at the end may not have the best results. So potentially at the beginning, so people would understand what their overall threshold is for the irrigation season could probably be looked at a little better. And then as they're receiving their mock bills, they can actually look at their consumption and subtract it from what their allotment is to see where they're kind of at for the year. So probably at the beginning.
Councillor Barkwell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question issue is along the same lines as Councillor Betts. To me, if you want equity, you should only be giving each parcel 25 cubic meters at the base rate. Is there any way our system would be able to combine the two and only just add the consumption amount to the household amount, and then it would be equal to the people who don't have the second meter? Is that possible? That would be, I think, fairest.
So through the mayor, it is possible. It would take a tremendous amount of staff time to do that. The problem we would run into, and we actually talked about this in internal discussions when we were looking at different proposals to bring forward. When we look at the two different services, it's fundamentally thought of that if anyone keeping the DSS service is probably using it to water their lawns, their gardens, their basically everything outside of the house. So the only way to try to combine the two accounts would be to basically take the lot size, come up with a factor, divide it by 2, give an allotment to each account. It would be extremely challenging to do that. So as a kind of compromise, if we want to call it that, administratively, what's being proposed with just providing the house with 25 cubic meters outside of everyone else is the easiest to administer. And from our perspective, that's what we're recommending.
Councillor Pargo.
I'm just thinking about that a little bit further. Oh, you couldn't just say for all those bills on the domestic second service that there simply wasn't, a 20, an initial 25 meter allocation at the base rate. Okay. I just wanted to go on. I don't know how material that difference would be, but it's already been presented to me as someone who wanted to build a secondary suite and just uses domestic second service as the water connection for the new suite or carriage house. How's that going to work? How are we going to reply to that?
So through the mayor, is the question a current existing DSS connection wanting to hook up to a carriage house?
Yeah. Down the road, they have, I don't think they know whether they're on irrigation water or domestic water, but to them, it's a domestic second service. Oh, I got a service here. I'm going to just hook up that to my carriage house.
So through the mayor, well, if we were to move forward with this type of a rate structure, it probably wouldn't. I guess first it would depend on the water going through that line. If it was domestically treated water, I don't think we would have a concern because we would just take that account, we would turn it into a main account, and we would just charge that 12 months of the year instead of 6. We would just use it as a regular account.
Okay.
Yeah.
Councillor Van Elfen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Question through our Director of Finance. So after the 25 meter consumption, let's say somebody draws, I know I'm grateful that we're looking at the mock billing for 1 year because that's a great educational tool. We went through that with the farmers with the blue boxes when we put those in, and it gave farmers opportunities to, correct leaks, downsize nozzles, do all sorts of different things to try to bring our water usage into line. If someone goes over the 25 meters, 25 cubic meters, is there going to be a penalty situation? Like, are we like with irrigation blue boxes?
So through the mayor, it would be, we would just be charging domestic rates. So in our fees and charges bylaw, I don't know the rate exactly, but it goes from 51 cents or 50 cents to I think it's $1.49 once you go over. Don't quote me on that number. I know it goes up. So there is a penalty component, but everyone has to deal with that.
No, thank you for the clarification.
Councillor Patton.
Thank you, Your Worship. I have to agree with Councillor Barkwell. I think that my house falls into one of the 3,000 households or 1,900 households under half an acre, and I get 25 meter allotment. And I really have a bit of an issue. We talk about fair and equitable, but what we're moving forward here is not fair and equitable to me as a property owner in Summerland. And I think that if we're going to move forward, I would really like to see every house in Summerland has an outdoor hose bib, and those houses that are half acre or less can also do watering from their principal dwelling unit, where they're already getting the 25 meter cubic meter allotment. And so I have a little bit of an issue with when we talk about fair and equitable, but in the true scope of it, 106 properties will be getting twice the water allotment than 1,900 that are on the same parallel as they are, which is one of my properties. Thank you.
Do you want to comment on that? Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think I'm just going to clarify the 25 cubic meter allotment because it's a complex system we have here in Summerland in terms of billing. So in the winter months, when there's no irrigation or there's no nothing, everything's shut off. The allotment to a house is 25 cubic meters. That's what you get. Now, what happens once the April starts and the irrigation season begins? That's when the property size comes into effect. So the property still is allotted the 25 cubic meters. However, it then gets an additional, based on the size of the property, an additional allotment that equals that 800 millimeter irrigation component that all the agricultural water users get. So that's why when we're looking at a property, depending on the size of the property, yes, you're going to get your 25 cubic meters regardless. There's an additional component that needs to be factored in as well. And that's where the whole lot size comes in, the 800 millimeters. And going to Councillor Betts's comments and questions earlier, that's where we as staff, if council was to ask us to move forward in providing documentation, we would literally have to look at every property individually, do those calculations, and then provide that to somebody. So I just wanted to hopefully clarify that 25 cubic meter allotment question. And hopefully I didn't confuse anyone.
Councillor Peak.
I'll just restate it, make sure I understand it. Actually, everybody actually gets that extra allotment once the season starts. They don't get it in the winter because they're probably not needing it. Okay. So I do understand it. I think that the billing is a very reasonable way to do it and not to do what Councillor Barkwell had spoken to. I think that that's a reasonable way to keep our costs in line for the delivery of the service. I believe that the suggestions that are basically in the recommendation will work it forward so that these 200 some odd properties will then come into alignment with all the other 3,000 properties. And I think that that was part of what we were working towards. The mock year, as Councillor Van Alphen has said, just gives that assurance. Councillor Betts' suggestion as the opportunity to have them analyzed to look at the actual property size and produced at the beginning. Was that the suggestion, Dave? I want to make sure I'm correct in that.
Yes, that was what Councillor Betts had put forward.
If we did that once, we wouldn't have to do that every year, but if we did it once at the beginning of this determination to move forward, that would give people something to gauge it against as they work forward on these mock monthly bills. And I think there's value in that. I think that would give some reassurance. So I think that's something I would suggest us doing. But otherwise, I agree with the statements within the report from our staff. And my God, we've been working at this a long time. I was hoping to Jesus that you guys would get this done while I wasn't here. But we're doing it now, and that's really important. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Dave, would you be able to come back with us to tell us how much work that would require? I mean, that's what I'm trying to figure out.
So through the mayor, or to the mayor, sorry. I think once we are able to get a spreadsheet put together, it would just come down to looking at each of the 242 properties, or it could be less if people decide to opt out before we have to send letters. And you're probably looking at what? Maybe 10 minutes per, 15 minutes per once the spreadsheet itself is set up just to input the size of the property. So a day or two max.
Counselor Van Alphen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through to our Director of Finance. So you would probably do that over GIS and then eliminate the garage, the house, the driveway as part of the size of the property?
Through the mayor, yes, I believe the language in our current fees and charges bylaw basically takes the property size and it actually factors in 70%. So it's saying that, you know, a typical lot coverage is 30% and 70% is then calculated for usage.
Okay, Counselor Betts.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In my considerations on this issue, I've definitely taken into account what so many of our residents have brought to us and some really positive and thoughtful feedback, even challenging the philosophy behind water meters and the cost of which I'm definitely, as a resident, concerned about the cost of bringing everybody on board, because that is a cost borne by all of us to bring everybody on board, to align our policy philosophically, but there, as a legislator, is a cost associated with that. And for me, it's about determining what's the most important path as a legislator in balancing your community's needs. I will say one thing that I found in the 2021 Water Master Plan was that after the community brought in our water meters after 2008, that the water consumption went from 12,250 megaliters in 2008 to 8,930 megaliters in 2021. And that is actually a 28% decrease in water usage. So for me, that's a really definitive number that encourages me to see the positive need for water meters, how it encourages smart watering, how it encourages modernizing your irrigation systems. And so I think that that's just an important point to bring forward to our domestic second service customers and residents, is that it does make a difference in the long run. So that's just a thought I wanted to share.
Thank you, Counselor Betts. I know we've had many discussions about the whole concept of metering and the cost of metering. But you know, in addition to the numbers that you've talked about, I just had a OBWB board meeting this morning, and there was talk not just about, well, everybody knows the whole province was in drought this year, but now they're talking about multi-year droughts. So, you know, a drought backing onto another year drought, backing onto another year drought. And this is a very real possible scenario that could play out. And so the talk now isn't so much can we afford meters, but it's more like can we not afford them? And so even more rural areas. We had this discussion at the RDWS last week's RDWS meeting about getting those rural areas in the regional districts that aren't metered, you know, getting metering in there. So they're going in that direction. So, you know, it's just a matter of time where I think everybody is going to be metered. So I don't think there's much going back on meters. Councillor Van Alphen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I was a very staunch non-supporter of agricultural meters at one time, but the numbers prove what's going, you know, like the numbers that Councillor Betts just talked about, those numbers, you know, help us all. It's a savings to all of us. Sure, we put out the money for the meters, but now we're chlorinating less water at our water treatment plant. So there is cost savings, and those cost savings are for everybody. You know, and, you know, I'm sure there's a lot of domestic services out there that probably have leaks and issues, and this is going to show them. You know, especially, you know, I know in the agricultural sector, you could have a 2-inch water main line underground, 6 feet underground, 5 feet underground. Sometimes it takes months and months for that to come to the surface, to find that leak. And, so I mean, that first year of mock billing, I think is really fair. And it's going to help people, kind of like, holy, I had no idea I was using this much water, and start looking at the issues. So I think it's a good thing. And I would bring the staff recommendation forward, Mr. Mayor, if that's appropriate.
Do you have a seconder? Counselor Peak. Any further discussion? Counselor Betts.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do think that option 2 is important in that it only charges the cost of the meter during the 6 months of usage. I know that there's a challenge accepting that cost as a resident if you're now starting to pay that, if you currently have a DSS. But in light of the discussions around having meters and the necessity of them, that is part of the cost of our community, even though it is high. But I think that the 6-month option is best, option 2.
Okay, thank you. Any further discussion? I'll call the question. It's up on the screen there. All in favor? And none opposed. That carries. Next item, Community Emergency Preparedness Fund. Fire Chief, I think, is taking this one.
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, councilors. Just looking for your support on this 100% grant funded report. It's through the UBCM Community Emergency Preparedness Fund. They offer a maximum of $30,000 and we're looking to spend $29,925, and we're looking to improve our communications with new radios. And this will help us on the fire grounds and communicating with each other in practices as well. We handed in the report October 20th, so we're just looking for a decision from you. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Councillor Peak.
I don't have a question, but I would bring it forward because I think we reviewed it at the last presentation.
Okay.
If I could bring that resolution forward.
Okay, that's to approve the application. Councillor Van Elfen, second. Any discussion? Councillor Peak.
I want to thank our fire chief, Rob. I think this is very important, and I think that to be able to get granting towards it makes a difference on being able to have it happen. So congratulations on keeping an eye out, and we really want to work hard to do the best we can for our volunteer fire department. It's an extremely important part of our community, and we very much appreciate the efforts that go into making that possible. Thank you.
Thank you. No further comment. I'll call the question. All in favor? None opposed. That carries. Next item, 7.3, 2024 council meeting schedule. Corporate officer, please.
Thanks, Mayor Holmes. So before council is the proposed 2024 council meeting schedule drafted in accordance with the 3-week council meeting rotation as set by the district's council procedure bylaw. The proposed 2024 meeting schedules a total of 17 council meeting dates throughout the year. When adopting the 3-week meeting rotation, council requested the ability to review this rotation at the end of 2023. So should council wish to make any changes for 2024, now would be the time to do so to allow for proper timing to amend the council procedure bylaw. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? Councillor Trainer.
I just have a question for our CAO. Don't know what that noise was. What is Councillor Patton? I think your mic's on. What has feedback been from staff now that they have a little bit extra time between meetings?
Thank you for the question, and through the mayor, feedback from staff has been very positive. We talked recently at our senior management team meeting about this, and The additional time does afford additional bandwidth for us to make sure the advice we're putting forward is of high quality nature and allows us to do the proper research in between times. So it's been really well received.
And do we have any data on the length of meetings compared to, so we're on a 3-week schedule compared to a 2-week schedule. Do we know on meeting day whether the meetings are now running longer, that we're going every 3 weeks?
I don't have any hard data at my fingertips. We could do a deep dive if that's what council wanted through the mayor. But there's elements that are outside of our control that do tend to drive meeting length. For example, the amount, some topics of public comment opportunity. Sometimes we have a lot of delegation requests. I think recently we had one with 5 delegations at the front end, and we want to accommodate those, obviously. So they tend at the front end to add time to the back end as well. And there's just an ebb and flow to that. So our experience is that we're more or less still kind of finishing up at a roughly the same time. And of course, there's also the time in between regular meetings where we have closed meetings, and sometimes those agendas have a lot on them. So, more or less, it seems to be our anecdotal information roughly the same time.
Thank you.
Councillor Patton.
Thank you. Can you hear me with all the excitement going on in the pool here in Mexico? I'm not sure. But my question to our CAO, has this 3-week council rotation been better for staff or better for our citizens? That was my question in the very beginning when we were talking about going to this. And if it's better for our staff, but not so well for our citizens, I'm not sure if this is how we want to proceed. Thanks.
CEO.
Thank you through the mayor to Councillor Patton. I do appreciate you raising that question. I think it's a very important question we all need to be mindful of. We haven't heard any concerns from our citizens on this since the rollout until today with the public comment opportunity, where one citizen came forward and mentioned that statement, and we appreciate that feedback. We don't really look at it as something for staff. I think there's certainly peripheral benefits for staff, and we really appreciate it. We really want to make sure our advice to council is the best advice and having the time to do that. And so hopefully there's sort of benefits on all sides, but we certainly haven't seen or heard any concerns from citizenry, to my knowledge. I'm looking at corporate officer if we've heard nothing in the record there.
If you don't mind, one of the positives too we've heard from development services is that the 3-week rotation allows us to hit our usual 2-week requirement of posting ads in the paper. So instead of waiting, so if we had the 2-week rotation, they would actually be waiting, I think it would be 4 weeks for proper advertising, whereas this way we actually can get it done in 2 meetings rather than extending it over 3 or 4.
I think there's all kinds of things that you could argue make it better or make it or worse, but they're all rather unmeasurable. One thing you can measure is tonight. We're having a public hearing tonight, and if we weren't on a 3-week rotation, this developer would have to wait 1 more week. That's customer service. That's improved customer service. Yeah, and you can measure that. Councillor Betts.
Thank you, through the mayor. I mean, I will recognize that we did receive some feedback earlier from a resident who did not feel that his needs were being met as diligently. And I want to acknowledge that we received that. But I mean, to me, it's looking at it as a package, in that we tried to work with development services to streamline variance permits so that they can take care of certain ones that are of a minor nature, whereas forwarding other ones to council in a timely fashion. I think that's a really important change that we did in addition to the schedule. For me, I think I'm willing to acknowledge the quality of work in between, as well as the residents getting shorter meeting times, actually with these notices for a public hearing. So I would be curious if any other residents had positive or negative experiences with the format that they would contribute.
Councillor Barkwell.
Yeah, I was going to make the same sort of comments that you've raised. That one of the rationales for the 3-week cycle was for providing better service to development services in the cycle of notifications and such. Some people never really appreciated that aspect of it when it was brought in. As far as meeting length goes, I mean, our meetings vary in length tremendously. After sitting at this table for 9 years, I can remember in the previous years when we had the 2-week cycle, we didn't have afternoon meetings nearly as often. We had lots of meetings where we had to pass resolutions and go over past our regular scheduled meeting time, like 10 o'clock after 10. So it varies tremendously. Subjectively, I would say those who think our meetings are too long should be glad they're not in Penticton, where they go on for twice as long as ours. That's just simply not an issue here, I don't believe.
Councillor Peak.
Thank you, Your Worship. I wanted to say that I approached some of the associations that I work with to ask if they had any issues with the change in the scheduling of our meetings and whether it impeded in any way the things that they had to interact with the council or the staff. And I received no negative comments whatsoever. And I spoke with 2 construction companies, and they feel that it doesn't impact them, that the advertising and the things that are required are something that actually has improved. And in regard to the length of our meetings, as Councillor Barkwell said, they vary. And my experience of 19 years elsewhere, they vary. And it doesn't matter whether you've set them that you're going to finish at 10 o'clock or whether you're going to finish at 4:30 or 4 o'clock. They just vary, and that just depends on the amount of time we spend with each item, the kind of items they are, the kind of presentations that come to the public part of our meetings and delegations. And that's just the ebb and flow of looking after a community in a democratic way. And I think that those things just flow along. And whether it's a 3-week schedule or a 2-week schedule, I think that we all get used to it, and the changes that we've done in terms of minor variances helped. There are some things that even the fact that we've changed to our hours of service and our days of service, they all help make the flow work. And over time, people get used to the way you're doing it. So I think that I would offer that we should continue as we have been this past year.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments, questions? So someone like to bring a motion forward, please? Councillor Van Elfen.
Move the staff recommendation.
Thank you. Second. Councillor Peak. Any further discussion? I'll call the question. All in favor? Any opposed? Councillor Patton's opposed. That motion carries. Bylaws for adoption. This is the financial plan that we discussed last meeting. Anybody like to bring that forward for adoption? Councillor Betts. Councillor Trainer. All in favor? Any opposed? That carries. Growing Communities Reserve Establishment Bylaw, Director of Finance. Well, is this for adoption as well? Oh, this is just for, so we discussed this last meeting. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, Councillor Trainer. Councillor Peak, any discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? That carries. Now the items removed from the consent agenda. So the first one will be the Rural Health Initiative. And this is, they're asking for a letter of support. Now, I don't know how much people know about these guys, but I've heard lots of good things about the Rural Health Network. and some of the work that they do and the advocacy work they do to get, to make sure healthcare isn't hemorrhaging out of our smaller rural communities. And this research that they're proposing to show the connection of health delivery of health services within communities and the economic development of those communities seems like valuable research, and they're asking for a letter of support. So I'd like to just see if we're okay with that. Yeah. Okay. So corporate officer, we just need a motion to provide a letter of support. Yeah. Somebody want to bring Councillor Peak, Councillor Van Elfen. Any discussion? All in favor? Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Sorry, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was just going back through my notes because I've written about this before. Can you just remind me, is Summerland a part of the rural health network, or because I believe there's a bit of a disconnect for our community about where we sit with this. Can you speak to that, please?
So this is they're a nonprofit organization, so they don't define. We might even want to look into joining them. I think municipality groups can join them. It's the government that kind of says we're not a rural community, that lumps us in with Penticton. But just because for the Ministry of Health is administrative purposes, just because they say we're not a rural community doesn't mean we're not a rural community. So it's, I mean, that's one of the big things we have, and one of our several issues with the Ministry of Health, let's say. So yeah, I don't think that really plays into it. Councillor Trainer.
Yeah, you're right. And we have asked the Ministry of Health several times, and I've asked Interior Health to provide a definition of rural community and why we are lumped in with Penticton. That's one of the reasons that we haven't been able to get funding, is because they lump us in with Penticton. And so when they make an investment in Penticton, they see that as making an investment in Summerland too. It would be interesting to find out more about this network and what their definition of rural is. But I think it's definitely worthwhile participating in.
Councillor Pete?
We definitely don't belong or deserve to be lumped in with Penticton. We are a separate community and we should be financed as such through the Ministry of Health. But I do believe that the information that this rural network is looking forward to find is worthwhile in the terms of being able to argue whether their monies are applied in a manner that they should be. And those gap information may, in the long run, benefit communities like ourselves that are trying to separate ourselves from this larger community, because we are an independent community and should not be in with Penticton.
Thank you. Okay, so we have the motion on the floor. I'll call the question. All in favor? Any opposed? That carries. So the next one is the OBWB letter regarding invasive mussels. And, oh geez, I just lost my agenda here. So in September, invasive quagga mussels were found in the Snake River, which is a tributary to the Columbia River, which so is the Okanagan, a tributary to the Columbia. So the Columbia River system had been the last river system in the United States not to have these invasive mussels, but now they're there, and so they're getting closer. It's you know, the OBWB has had this "Don't Move a Mussel" campaign for quite some time now, but now it's getting much more serious. It's getting closer. It's actually in our tributary. So they're trying to organize all the municipalities, and organizations like TODA and First Nations to support their their efforts to get the province to address a number of issues. It's all in your in your agenda package there about their letter. So they're just asking for everybody for letters of support for their initiatives. And the main one is well, here we go, the drain and dry legislation, that any boat coming into the province is drained and dried before it goes. So that's so they're asking. I said I'd bring it forward for support, and if there's interest, we could. Councillor Van Alphen.
Thank you. I'd move that we write a letter of support. Thank you.
Yep. Seconder. Councillor Peak. Any discussion or questions? Councillor Peak.
This was an item I tried to bring forward before, and your worship told me that there was a collective movement coming forward and to wait until it happened. And this is what it is.
There
So
you
I
go.
think we
Yeah.
should be supporting it. And there was money. I mean, they had more money and then they pulled the money, and we need the money back. The evidence is there and it's really important. So pull the plug, clean and drying, whatever. We need to be doing it, and we need the inspectors to prove that it's happening, to have that oversight.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor Betts.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do know on page 2 of the letter from OBWB, the first action that is to be taken immediately by the province, or recommended action, is to introduce a temporary moratorium on out of province watercraft entering BC. So how do they intend? I mean, how would you do that really? Because that's saying everybody from south of the border and east is not going to be allowed to bring a watercraft into BC, and there are impacts to that. So has there been a discussion of what that means?
Yeah, so there's a couple angles on that. One is a temporary moratorium, knowing that legislation takes quite a while to wind its way through the legislature and get approval and stuff. So the idea is having a temporary moratorium is to allow that time for that drain and dry legislation to get through the legislature. But also the OBWB and other groups have been asking for this for years. And nothing's happened. So the idea is, okay, we need to kind of push the panic button a little bit here, because it is in our water system. So if you ask for something that seems drastic, like a temporary moratorium, then maybe it'll take it a bit more seriously. That's the thinking. I don't think, honestly, nobody expects the province to put a moratorium, but maybe it'll get them moving on introducing the legislation that's required. And maybe they will prevent boats coming in from the States. You can control. It's much easier to control boats coming in across the border than it is coming across international border than it is across a provincial border, of course, right? So that's kind of the thinking behind that. Councillor Betts, yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would just like to note, so that our residents understand the importance of the legislation, is that these invasive quagga mussels end up clogging up entries to our water systems, to our drains, to our pipes, and it ends up costing tremendous amounts of money to maintain, clean, and fix these problems. As well, in the Snake River right now in the United States, what they're looking at doing, and they have released 4 large tanker trucks of pesticide into this watershed to try and deal with this problem. And that's at a tremendous ecological cost. And I think that if we can be doing preventative measures, and that it is time, it's incredibly important before we just start having to do terrible things to our environment at a higher cost.
Yeah, so the United States, they're allowed to dump pesticides into water. In Canada, we can't deal with pesticides. We can't dump those chemicals into our water systems. It's unlawful. And we actually just this morning at the OBWB meeting. They talked about those pesticides they dumped into the Snake River to deal with it. The number of dead fish that they've been pulling out, including 35-year-old sturgeon, it's been incredible. I mean, that's the kind of drastic things that they're trying to deal with. We were told about a lake. It was a reservoir in Colorado that they found mussels in, and they tried to drain. So they lowered the reservoir, they drained it, and so there's hardly anything. With dump chemicals all in the little bits in the pools and everything that were left, and then filled it back up. And the next year they were still there. So it's getting rid of these things is really difficult. And so if we can keep them out, we should do everything we can to keep them out in the first place. So, CIO?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just for my own clarity then, since I think the thinking is to support the efforts, would the support be for all 8 points then? Further to Councillor Betts' comment, all 8 points and all that moving forward, knowing of course that I think as of today, I don't think Alberta, for example, has any mussels been detected in it, but this would be inclusive of Albertans not being permitted to bring their watercraft into BC if this is proceeded with.
Yeah, that was a subject of pretty lively debate at the OBWB board. There were some board members who think that we should be working better with Alberta than doing that. Nobody's saying that we shouldn't be working with Alberta, that we need to make those, we need to work better with Alberta for sure. But as an extreme immediate measure, knowing where those mussels are, i.e. in Idaho and Washington, not from Alberta, then the focus needs to be keeping that southern border locked, and being a temporary moratorium. It doesn't mean that we can't work something within that time. Work with Alberta to come up with a plan together and work as partnerships, because you're right. We don't want it to be seen that BC's going it alone. That if we can be working with Alberta, it'd be much more effective, especially when trying to get the federal government on board. Councillor Peak.
In light of our own discussion, would we perhaps want to say that we would wish to modify the item number 1 to have a moratorium for boats that are passing through our international border as opposed to a provincial border?
So the problem, most of the mussels that are found on boats and at inspection stations and whatnot, in the past years haven't really come from the States. They've come through Alberta. They're mostly from Ontario, and most of the boats from Ontario come through Alberta. That's why the problem isn't boats from Alberta, it's boats from the east that come through Alberta. So, yeah. Okay, is the motion on the table? Yeah, okay, I'll call the question. All in favor? And none opposed, that carries. Next item, the letter from the Lutheran Church regarding the dog park. So I brought this forward saying, okay, so we're kind of back to square one. And I think we need to provide some direction to staff of what we want to do or where to go from here, because we shouldn't kind of leave staff in limbo. So I just brought that forward for that discussion, if we're up for it, or we could, decide how we want to proceed. If anybody has any ideas, Councillor Barkwell.
I would suggest that the Peach Orchard location was an overriding success or overwhelming success, whatever there was some, I do note that there was some concerns from someone who spoke from Tuscan Terrace above the beach, but we also had someone speak afterwards, after we'd made our decision to go to make an inquiries with the church, that they were the closest ones at Tuscan Terrace, and they thought it was a delightful park, and they weren't bothered by it at all. And there was 4 or 5 more at the complex of their neighbors that they would bring in support of the dog park if they'd had been sort of aware of the opportunity to speak before the meeting. So considering all of that and the years of effort we've made, I would, I'd be perfectly willing to support a permanent dog park down there at Peach Orchard. Maybe not quite as big. Not sure if it has to be as big as it is, but maybe somebody has some other thoughts on that.
Councillor Patton.
Thank you, Worship. I was reading your articles this last little while, and you talked about in regards to our recreation center, the referendum, and you talked about to build a sense of community. And I, for one, have been down at that dog park pretty much every day since it opened. And for me, that dog park down at Peach Orchard is building a sense of community within Summerland. I have met, I believe I've told you this before, but we've lived in our place now in Summerland for 15 years, and it's down at the dog park that I've met neighbors that live, not far from us. But where did I meet them? I met them at the dog park. And I agree with Councillor Barkwell, and I brought this up when we talked about the Lutheran Church and we talked about other options. Again, we've explored these options, and we have gone to extent to try and figure out how we can make better the community that does for dogs. And we found that Dale's Meadows was a success. We know through the staff report, the last time that it came out, that 591 people had signed a survey or a petition in favor of the dog park through the Summerland Dog Association. And which is, I think that we really should be looking at it through a new lens, that this is something that our community has been using, and I believe that as we move forward, I would like to see it move forward, and we move into, and I agree with Councillor Barkwell that perhaps maybe not quite as big, maybe not a full acre, but maybe, a little bit smaller. But I truly think that as we move into budget, that we discuss making it a permanent location. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Trainer.
I would support making this a permanent dog park as well. I don't have a dog, but I hear from a lot of dog owners how much they love this park, and people will come up to me and just tell me that they really enjoy using it. I do have young children, and we use the new playground at Memorial Park, and that brings us a lot of joy. And I know what Councillor Patton means about building a sense of community, because there's definitely a sense of community at that playground that we have. And so I imagine that that same feeling is experienced by dog owners at Peach Orchard. So I would support making that a permanent dog park. I'm not an expert on dog park sizes, so if it needs to be a bit smaller, that's fine, or stay the same. I would kind of leave that up to people to give me advice who actually have dogs and use that park regularly. I take their feedback into consideration. But yeah, I think it would be a nice addition to our community.
Thank you, Councillor Peak.
Thank you, Your Worship. I want to thank the fact that we did go back out to the Lutheran Church, and I really kind of pushed for that. I appreciated their letter and understood their observations. It made perfectly good sense to me why they couldn't support having a dog park in their area there. Having sat at council this term, but also since I made suggestion to go out with that letter to the Lutheran Church and possibly use Powell Beach between the tennis courts and the thing, I've had lots of people talking to me. So it's very interesting how that feedback came because of our discussion at council. So I would like to support the dog park to remain at Peach Orchard. And when we say permanent, I would like to see it put as a size. It could be a little smaller. I understood the distances divided up and how bigger dogs use it and how smaller dogs use it. I'm wondering, rather than permanent in terms of affixing the posts in the ground, whether it's possible to leave it that you can move it slightly, because there may be times where it's wet there, or maybe you shift it a bit because of the usage on the grass, those kind of things. So that would just be one of my comments towards it. But I will certainly support the having the park in that area.
Yeah, that would be if we choose for it to remain there, then that's the decision we have to make. Do we keep it as a temporary fencing, or which can then be moved around and sizes change or whatever, or do we put so-called permanent fencing? You can always remove fencing, though it's kind of expensive to remove once you put it in the fence, once you put it in the ground. So that would be the next decision, I guess. And staff could come back with options on that, I suppose, right? Yeah. Councillor Betts.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think the discussion all along, has been very, very two-sided about two different user groups, our residents with dogs and people who may or may not like having dogs around them. I do acknowledge the recreation benefit for the human companions who are taking their dogs out to the waterfront. I think, to me, that's the biggest reason why this, for me, would be a yes, would actually be for the human use of that space. It really is, to me, it's not about the dogs. Dogs can run and play, but it's about how humans are able to use the space and gather and be at the waterfront. And that's one of the reasons that I do think it's a positive spot, even though I have hesitation because I don't like the idea of fence dividing our space, like metal fences. But I acknowledge that it's really positive in our community for our dog owners, of which there's many, many, many. One other thing that I think is really positive about that location is our brand new 4-season bathroom at Peach Orchard Beach. And that is just such a great use for dog owners to be able to use a facility when they're out with their pets. So for me, again, I would want to look at the size. I actually go down there a fair amount, and I found that the whole 1 acre wasn't necessarily being used most of the time. So let's take a look at that. Maybe it could be 0.75, whatever, so that other users get a little bit more of that space. But in principle, now that we've looked at some more other options, I believe that I can support it as well.
Councillor Van Elfen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do still have some concerns. Size is one. The other thing that's been a big concern of mine is the boat launch. The parking at the boat launch. And I don't want to see that taken away by other users. I think we need to, I've said that in last budget rounds, that we need to expand the parking at that boat launch. It's always congested. The parking down there is a nightmare. You know, I know bylaw has done the best they can in trying to monitor that. And I talked to a lot of people, like boat people, who, you know, they'll see a car parked in a boat parking area, like a truck trailer parking area with a kennel on the back. I wonder what they're doing here, right? So, you know, I think we need to have that discussion during budget. You know, I'm still concerned about the residents above and their concerns. One person comes and speaks in favor and says, oh, they have a few neighbors that also speak in favor. I didn't hear them. I heard the one person. I heard a lot of people in opposition. If we're going to talk about this, it needs to be discussed at budget, but if it's going to become permanent, then it needs to become permanent with permanent fencing. But is there a way that we can plant it with trees or something that may help buffer some of that noise that's going up to those residents? You know, there's fast growing shrubberies out there called willows and what have you that may help with that. You know, I'm not 100% opposed, but I want to hear what it's going to cost us during budget. And there's more than just a dog park involved. Here's the boat launch is a concern. So that cost of additional parking and, you know, if we're going to do this, then it needs to be done right. And modular lock fencing, that's temporary, right? So is it temporary or is it not? Thank you.
Yeah, that's what we need to decide. Sorry. Oh, okay. We'll go Councillor Patton, then Councillor Barkwell.
Thank you, Worship. You know, Councillor Van Elfen has some good points. And I think when it does, however we proceed with this, I believe that Darren from our bylaw department has some phenomenal ideas in regards to parking down there. And I think that it would be prudent for our development services director to have Darren speak with our rec department in regards to his ideas. He had some tremendous ideas that would decrease the size of the dog park and increase parking down there, which I think would be like I say, I was blown away with his comments when he was down there talking with us. Anyways, thank you so much.
Thank you, Councillor Bark.
Yes, two things if I could. Councillor Betts Councillor Van Elfen sort of brought up the idea of amenities. I guess, and the third thing is like, where do we go from here? Do we put forward a resolution directing staff to come back with a plan? I'd like to see some options, and I think that it's worth spending a few dollars for benches and tables and coverings or something, because people like to, while their dogs are playing, maybe sit there and talk to other people in the park, and they can't sit on the ground. But they do have to be out there in the park. So something like that. And the parking is an issue even before the dog park. It was an issue. Maybe it's a bigger issue now, which only goes to show the success of the dog park. I just feel, and Councillor Van Elfen and I brought up this before, the area to the north of the boat launch seems to be such an obvious place to expand parking. Right now, it's completely unused and a wasted space. And I don't understand why it hasn't been incorporated as parking before now. Maybe there's a good reason, I don't know, but that seems like an obvious first choice before infringing on the size of the park itself. But this could all come to us in a report if we direct staff to provide one during budget time. Is the obvious, because nothing comes for free.
Okay, so corporate officer or CIO, would it be better to have a resolution now or direction during budget? Probably a direction now, no?
Yeah, I think, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Maybe just if we can get a motion that, because certainly we're hearing it'd be good to have these conversations in budget. So a motion that this come back with some options for the budget conversation for this coming year, I think would be good for us.
Councillor Peak?
While the corporate officer is doing wording for a motion, I'd like to reinforce that what Councillor Van Alphen and Councillor Barkwell said in terms of parking. Several years ago, we spoke about the north area and it could be used for parking. I don't know if there's a reason why we couldn't. And perhaps that's something staff could look at. And I look at something close to the water. I don't know that it all has to be paved, but maybe it's gravel in there if we're going to expand the parking rather than doing pavement. But maybe that's all part of what comes back to us.
Yeah, I do know we have discussed that before, and it certainly is used informally as overflow parking for a boat launch, but I think CEO, do you have a comment?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You took the words right out of my mouth, and we will talk more when we get into budget, but I think there's also tenure issues there with boundaries and what we can do formally. And so we'll show where those are when we get into the budget, but you're right. We've been pretty accommodating with people informally using it. But if we go to do something more permanent, probably have to engage the province and others to do that stuff. But anyway, that'll all come back.
Councillor Bard?
Now that the CEO has mentioned that the land issues, it reminds me, yes, it did come up before, and I looked on our GIS system, and the property boundaries are all over the place down there. You know, the road is here, and the boundaries there, and they're little triangles and squares and stuff. And so true, it might not exactly be within a particular lot owned by the district, but informally, maybe if we just took the curb out and put in some curbs that kind of organize the parking a little bit better, and nobody needs to know the difference. And because it's the rest of the park is not necessarily all on district owned land, that's for sure. And there's a little difference. Nobody knows where the boundaries are when you're down there on the ground. So I'll put forward a motion that staff come back to council with the recommendations for development of a permanent dog park at that location, along with improved parking, and just leave it wide open for their ideas.
Okay, seconder. Councillor Patton seconds. Any further discussion? Councillor Patton?
Thank you, Worship. My assumption is, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, is that the temporary fencing will be maintained at the Peach Orchard site until such time as we go through the budget process. So if I'm not mistaken, I don't think we have to do any resolutions to let it stay. Thank you.
I think we'd need a resolution to remove it, but if we don't have any resolution, then it stays. Any further discussion? I'll call the question. All in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. That carries. Okay, then the final letter, the Silga Community Excellence Awards. That's letter H, attachment H. Just bring this forward to put it on our radar. So if we want to enter any things, we have until February 6th or something like that to submit. And so any projects that we think might be worthy, then we should bring them forward in due course. Or we could talk about it later. Councillor Peak.
Your Worship, I agree with you, and I did put down 3 ideas. I'll just state them today because I think that we could look at these as an opportunity. Our collaboration with Giants Head with the PIB and the Alliance is something that we could highlight and do a short presentation on. And the work that we're doing in collaboration with the Rotary on the pier is another one that we could promote and do as an example of the kind of efforts that we can do within our communities, as well as the work that we've done on the solar village. So those are three ideas I thought about. And I appreciate Silga putting this out because you don't remember the dates you have to do this stuff in. So it's good.
Yeah, thank you. I think those are three good ideas. So maybe we could, if anybody has ideas, we could bring them forward to staff, and then you could come back to us before the February 5th meeting, and we could decide which ones we want to put forward. Would that work? Yeah? Okay, sounds good. Public comment period.
Hi, Council, Brad Besler. I just want to say there was no need for that referendum to go forward this year. The mayor told Global News this weekend that when Penticton built their pool, they received 2/3 in grant money. So the fact that you pushed this referendum forward before we even knew if the 25 million grant was approved or not was ridiculous. It was reckless, and it divided the community. Fiscally responsible people were described as haters, fear mongers, selfish, not caring about the future. And all of that could not have been further from the truth. Earlier this year, you told this whole council chamber that you wanted residents to have all the information. But at the last council meeting, you shut down the idea of informing residents about the 8 million in loans the district might need to take out next year for other capital expenses. I didn't hear you express concern for the stress and hardship that could have caused on families in this community, and not just families, residents, period. And that was very disappointing. I believe you showed your true colors to a lot of people in this community. And with all due respect, I would encourage you to humble yourself moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Don't see anyone else in the gallery. So if I could have a resolution to close the meeting pursuant to sections 91C, E, G, and M of the Community Charter. Councillor Van Elfen, Councillor Betts, all in favor? That carries.